But first, last night I discussed the latest waste of taxpayers' money, the funding given by the Australia Council to avant-garde performers whose work is sick rather than artistic. Today, the federal minister responsible, Arts Minister Paul Fletcher, was interviewed about this, and frankly, his lame effort typifies so much that's wrong with the current federal government, which really looks like it's in charge of anything, even its own agencies. Yesterday, we had the spectacle of the Prime Minister seeming to endorse the West Australian Premier's decision to keep his state locked up against the rest of the country more or less indefinitely.
You know, the Western Australian government is working to get themselves in a position where those borders can open, and it's important to have a plan to do that because we want to see the country open again. The Western Australian economy needs it and Western Australians need it, but they also want it to be done safely, and that's why I understand and support the decision he believes he had to make, and he will make the decision about when that border should open.
In the PM's defence, I think in the end he figured, why fight something you can't yourself change? But it's one thing for a Prime Minister to fail to fight an out-of-control Premier. What about a minister who fails to rein in his out-of-control agency in his own portfolio? What's the point of electing a government and having ministers anyway if everything is decided by untouchable bureaucrats? To remind you, these are $80,000 grants from the Australia Council to so-called performance artists whose work in this case includes stuff that's so disgusting I can't even show it to you on air. Stuff you are paying for, but which the television rules dictate I can't show you at 6 o'clock in the evening. Like the cabaret artist who lies naked on stage with the PM's face drawn on her backside so that the cracks between her buttocks, I'm sorry, that's how crude I've got to be so you can understand this, when she flexes those cracks in her backside, they move up and down to act as though they're the Prime Minister's mouth. It's called bum puppetry. $80,000 for that, your money, not for a soup van feeding the homeless or a charity that teaches illiterate adults to read, but rubbish in such bad taste, I can't even put it to air. Then there's this bloke who says he's a poet, who's also won $80,000 a year of your money, writing his poetry on toilet paper because he says, quote, poetry always accompanies bowel movements. The last time something like this happened, the government assured us it'd never happen again. That was when a grant was given to a so-called artist who filmed and performed monthly live self-inseminations to, quote, these are not my words, elevate the experience of queer reproduction and disrupt heteronormative parenting narratives. You can't make this stuff up, can you? I mean, if you couldn't show this on TV, how could it be possibly worthy of taxpayer funding? But when confronted on radio today about the latest outrage, all the minister would say was he's asked for an explanation and that someone would look into it and get back to him.
Do you know much about bum puppetry?
Well, let me make it clear that particular artist's work is very much not to my taste, and I have spoken to both the Chair and the Chief Executive of the Australia Council to ask for an explanation. I am concerned, and I've expressed that concern to the Australia Council. Now, again, an important point
But that's
here,
it, you're concerned about it. You're not outraged by it, you're not disgusted by it, you've just got some concerns, do you?
That particular artist, I don't think that work does not appeal to me at all, and certainly I think it's extraordinarily disrespectful. But there is a key point here when it comes to arts funding.
The minister went on to say that it's a well-established principle, he says, that arts funding decisions are made at arm's length from ministers because we shouldn't have ministers, he says, making individual decisions. Well, what an absolute cop-out. I worked for 2 arts ministers in the Howard government. I've never heard such rubbish. That is the minister, that is the government that appoints the board of the Australia Council. So I say again, what's the point of a minister if he can't and won't do anything? Why is Paul Fletcher being paid $360,000 a year if he's got no say over how the Australia Council spends your $215 million in funding every year? And what's the point of electing what's supposed to be a centre-right Conservative government if taxpayers' money continues to be wasted on left-wing causes like the other so-called artist in this grants round that's been sending out tweets in favour of New South Wales and federal Labor leaders and calling that art? If the Australia Council has money to spare, why not give it to Opera Australia, internationally famous Australian icon organisation that's been laying off staff and selling its warehouse because of the pandemic? Or a women's shelter, the SES, lifesaving, I don't care, anything other than bum puppetry. Tell you, if the PM wants to know why his government is suffering in the polls, it's general impotence like this over public servants that's a good part of the answer. Voters aren't stupid. So the coalition has got to stop treating them as though they are if they want any hope of getting back in this race.